This is your Chargers linebacker, Dan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, you can say all the bare naked ladies references that you want, but we are officially 1 week away from the first game of the Chargers 2024 NFL season. We're finally here. It's the prime week. It's the hype week. We're here basically to run down everything that we possibly can over the next weeks. Obviously, we're going to get into the preview with the Oakland Raiders on week 1 throughout this week. But this is one of our favorite type of aspects of the show, is getting to talk to the fans, take questions and answers. Obviously, big things that took place with the Chargers roster earlier on this week to finalize the 53-man roster with an asterisk, because as Joe Hortiz said, the 53-man roster is never really finalized. But Dan, it's prime. It's prime now to get hyped. Everybody's excited. Chargers football is coming back 1 week from today. I think you can taste the excitement in the air.
Woo! Certainly can taste the excitement in the air, because Chargers football, Jake, I get to say this. Chargers football 1 week from today will be on our televisions. The new era with Jim Harbaugh, Joe Hortiz, and company will be live and in high def against the Las Vegas Raiders, and I cannot wait. And for everyone out there, you know the drill. If this is your first time tuning in, please hit the like, subscribe as we're going through. Add your comment, your topics, your questions, your thoughts in the comments, and we'll do our best to kind of weave those through as we kind of go through the topics today. Again, we'll talk a bit about the Raiders week 1, which will go into way more detail as we continue on this week. We'll also go into some of the signings and transactions and roster 53 stuff, as well as all the questions and answers that folks have. Jake, before we get to that, cheers to you. What's your drink of choice?
Well, I actually didn't have time to put mine together this morning because I was rushing home to get ready for the live show. And you know, it's unfortunate that this show is being held at 9 o'clock in the morning, because I don't want to feel necessarily like an alcoholic, but I have plenty of drinking to do later today for my fantasy football draft that is taking place this afternoon. So I'm saving it for that. If that was the case, I'd probably have some Basil Hayden in my hand. I probably should, from a health standpoint, have some of my recovery amino acids, which is probably what I would have had on this show this morning. But due to time constraints, I didn't get a chance to do that. So
say la vie.
I appreciate it.
Well, good. There's time for alcoholism later, I guess.
Yes, that in the Bane voice, that comes later.
Yes. Jake, before we get to that and all of the fun stuff, we'll get some of these comments here in a second, but let's first pay the bill. Let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline.
Well, I want to remind everybody that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet for up to $250 on your first deposit, and bet for anything from UFC to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on some of the blackjack and poker, or on with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today, betonline.ag, and get on the action. Just make sure to use that promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV to receive your 50% free welcome bonus for your first deposit for up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here.
Julio Camacho says, good morning, Bolt fam. 1 week away. That is correct. 1 week away. A couple of housekeeping things I wanted to ask you, Jake. I didn't get to talk to you about this, but it's something I wanted to discuss. 2 things. One, we talked about this last week, though. Giveaway will be announced tomorrow, because we're now in week 1. We're one bare naked lady away. We got references all day, by the way. Peep the Twitter handle. Number 2, Jake, you and I, we did something for, I think, the first 3 years of this show, where we had kind of the voicemail hotline.
Oh.
And it was a ton of fun. That was
a lot of fun.
And things have kind of glowed up a bit since then. We have a lot more interactions, a lot more subscribers and followers. For folks in the chat, like, I'm curious, is that something you would be interested in? So what we had before, during, or after the game, we had a voicemail hotline. where folks could call in, give us their live reactions, their feedback, their questions, whatever. We would then play those live on a corresponding episode, and then you can get our reactions and answers or whatever to your thoughts. Is that something you are interested in? I'll put a poll out on Twitter, but in the comments, let us know if you're interested. Jake, are you interested in this?
Well, yeah, real quick, anybody who is interested in that, go ahead and just drop a 1 in the chat so we can see a early acknowledgement of that. But God, I had forgotten all about that, Dan. That was actually a lot of fun. And there were a lot of laughs that I also remember from that because, Charger fans in general, this fan base has been emotionally scarred for a number of different years. And when the Chargers would sustain a loss, the emotions can get rather high.
It was heated.
And so I remember some voicemails that just literally went off the wall in frustration and emotion and say, I'm done with this team, this, that, and the other. And Dan would have these. I would be hearing them for the first time. So you'd be getting my live reaction in real time. And some of these were absolutely priceless. But I enjoyed those type of interactions, a different way to interact with questions that the fans have, or just, us in this fan base having to deal with the raw emotions of being a Chargers fan.
Yes. Okay. So we'll put out a thing later to see what folks are interested in. If not, it's all good. But just curious. The week seems so far away, says Miguel. Joel asks, are y'all tailgating? Yes, I will be there. So stay tuned for more details there. We'll put them out there later on this week. Forgotten Lolcow with a $5 donation super sticker. Thank you. You guys are the best. You're the reasons why we keep doing this. Appreciate your contribution to the show. Jake, there's a lot of people are excited. Jake said he had no time.
I didn't have time, actually. I was talking to Dan before this, and apparently we lost track of time for the fact to say, oh, by the way, we have a live show at 9. Let's get the hell on.
Yeah. Jorge says, Viva la vida. Kevin says, we got football Thursday, Friday, college football Saturday, back to NFL Sunday, then Monday night. How good did it feel?
Dan, you got to give me a 60-second tangent right now, okay? You got to let me talk about it. I don't care for the fact that it's September 1st, but my God, is it good to have
Here comes the draft talk. Here comes the draft talk.
It feels good to have college football back. What a week one it was. You see what Shedeur Sanders did on Thursday. You go out and you see some of the top players playing yesterday. Malachi Starks, Ollie Gordon, some just great overall performance. From T-Mac over there in Arizona, breaking records for them from a receiver standpoint. And then, Dan, my God, if you didn't see it yesterday, I would advise any of you to just spend 25 seconds to try to find it. But Utah State and Rob Carter Jr.'s interception. I mean, it might be the best interception / catch I have ever seen.
Cleanest.
Since watching football. Just unbelievable. Great week one of college football. Cannot wait to see how this all pans out. And Dan's going to get sick and tired of me talking about this throughout the season because he knows where my mind is headed come April.
I do. But I'm hoping that draft pick is much later than we are all expected or have seen in years past. Jake, so let's get to some of these questions right off the bat. Anthony, Bosa with a broken hand already? Now, you talk about traumatized, and I can imagine, and I feel for Joey because it seems like every year it's kind of like, okay, this is the healthiest I've ever been. I feel so good. And then inevitably something or many things happen, and that is no more. Joey was in the best state of his career in terms of health, went through a whole bunch of stuff last year, and then we see Bosa out for a while. Then last week, we start seeing pictures of him in kind of a hand brace. And then we see, I think it was Chris Rim from ESPN mentioned his hand looked pretty swollen. Apparently he had a broken hand that he had a procedure on since the joint practice. First, big deal, little deal, no deal. Second, do you think it's going to affect him come week one?
No, I think he'll be playing in full in week one. Can play with the club, The good thing about Joey is that he's got more than one move that he utilizes to get past offensive linemen. Number two, he had acknowledged that this was sustained during the Rams-Chargers joint practice, which by the time that we start week 1 next week will almost be a month since that took place. So you're already ahead of the curve in terms of the recovery process, which is nice. I get it. Everybody, as it relates to Joey Bosa's injury history, that obviously raises some red flags whenever you see something like that. But in terms of what he's going to be ready for, I don't think it's going to stop him. I don't think it's going to limit him, and he'll be ready to go.
Let's see. Question came in. Big Coop says, will Easton Stick play part of this team, or will they release him to make room for another player? So Chargers fans, we got some things to catch up on. In the last, I think it was the last live show, Jake, you and I both predicted. You gave it 1 week. There are people asking, will it be over under 24 hours from then when we will see another quarterback signed on this roster? Pound the under on both of them.
Should have taken the under.
Because Taylor Heineke from the Atlanta Falcons is traded to the Chargers for a conditional draft pick. I think it was conditional sixth
round pick. Yeah.
Jake, what did you make of the Chargers getting Taylor Heineke? And then will Easton Stick, let's answer his question, be part of the team, or will they release him to make room for another player? And again, this is released. It could be brought to the 50. It could be the practice squad, whatever.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to go, Dan. I would have thought for sure that once Taylor Heineke was acquired, that they were going to still probably keep the same amount of quarterbacks that they had before that acquisition and just roll with 2. As of right now, you have Easton Stick on the 53-man roster. Who knows how that's going to change, even leading into next week as far as the guys that you want active for the roster. Some things could change between now and next Sunday. But there was a lot of retooling as it relates to the roster, but specifically as it relates to the backup quarterback situation. You had to get some type of an upgrade after what you witnessed in the preseason. And for someone like Easton Stick, who's been on this roster enough, you're always hoping just in general terms that you're going to see some level of progression. Obviously, there's no comparison between what Easton Stick brings to the team and what Justin Herbert brings to the team, but you still like to have a capable backup in general. And we saw that throughout the preseason. There was plenty
capable
backup quarterbacks playing football.
Use the eye test.
And it seemed like, especially for the first 2 weeks of the preseason, it was just struggle for the offense to get going under Easton Stick. So I think the Chargers made the right move in terms of getting someone with a lot of starter experience, even in a short period of time in Taylor Heineke. And hopefully that's going to be able to develop better under this coaching regime for him. So just like Joe Hortiz has been churning the bottom of the roster to strengthen the depth at each position, I'm glad he acknowledged the fact that quarterback needed it too, especially after those first 2 preseason games.
Yeah, and we don't need to harp on this too much more. Chalk to most of what you had said. I think both of us were pretty consistent. I was probably more critical towards the end of it would have just been irresponsible for Easton Stick to be your QB2 going into the season when there were so many better options. And again, I'm not saying that they're going to be elite quarterbacks by any means, but so many better QB2 options out there. And Easton Stick, for all of the relationship stuff he has with Justin Herbert and the time he has in the organization and the mastery of the playbook, none of that translates to play on the field and the ability to win football games. And we saw the regression from last season to this offseason, training camp, preseason. And you could chalk up a lot of last season's, the end of the season to, the team was decimated by injuries. Easton Stick's going up against backups and backups to backups in preseason. And he should be, as a QB2 going into year 5, carving. And he just simply wasn't. And you then look at the landscape, see a ton of quarterbacks out there who are QB2, 3, sometimes 4, who you think, man, I just want someone serviceable to ride the ship. And that's what the Chargers found. There was a lot of folks thinking about Snoop Huntley from the Browns. There was some Jameis Winston talk. There's Ryan Tannehill. I like Tyler Heineke, man. I think he gives you what you need if you need it. And the question of if he's on the 53, I don't know this, but I tend to agree with some of the commentary that I've seen about He just needs to kind of master the playbook a bit and understand it. And I think when that happens, he will eventually be QB2. Again, all of this is an emergency situation. If Justin Herbert goes down for an extended period of time, you're screwed anyways. But in the short term, I was so happy for Chargers fans and so grateful for Joe Hortiz for what he has been doing. And I think that's kind of a jumping off point for one of the things that you, especially, but you and I have been so pissed off over the years is how seemingly complacent the front office of this team was once the draft was over. And then you hear Joe Hortiz talk about, the idea of churning the roster, and we hear concepts of compensatory picks, and you start seeing all that kind of stuff play out. And then you start seeing how many guys Joe Hortiz brings in for these camp battles. And
just in training camp. In training camp.
Training camp, trades. This is no hyperbole. We saw more from Joe Hortiz in like a 24-hour span from a trade perspective post-draft than we had seen throughout the entire tenure of Tom Telesco's career in LA. It feels like we're going from like 10-10 vision to all of a sudden like you had LASIK eye surgery, now you can see. Like I was blind, but now I can see. It blows my mind, and it kind of makes me sick that we were living in that reality for so long, but it makes me so grateful for the current reality. We haven't even talked about Elijah Molden yet, which, yes, please. But Jake, we have a GM that makes moves, churns the underbelly, and is looking to constantly improve the depth of this team.
Dan, it was a great example of that. I mean, when we heard Jim Harbaugh after that final preseason game, when it came to just before the final 53 cuts, he was basically saying, hey, he's going to be Batman for this period of time. Oh, he was Batman. He was Batman because we got that initial 53-man roster, and then they still weren't done on making tweaks because there was waiver claims to be had. The Chargers went out and they claimed Hassan Haskins, former Michigan running back, very familiar with Jim Harbaugh, who
more importantly, special teams ace.
Special teams held the single season record for Michigan in touchdowns before that was broken by Blake Corum just a couple of years later. But special teams demon is what the Titans were calling him in terms of what he was utilized at. And now you have a stable of running backs that, again, Dan, I think this is the running back stable might be one of the best examples to show a single year turnover from Joe Hortiz, because you had Austin Eckler from a statistical perspective, maybe even better from a fantasy perspective, that gave you good stats for him, not necessarily in the grand scheme of the team. And everybody was wondering who's going to be the running back 2 that's going to end up stepping up behind Austin Eckler. Joshua Kelly couldn't do it. Isaiah Spiller was never given a fair shot. You just couldn't find any of these guys that could come in there and give you some extra juice at the running back spot. And in a single season, Austin Eckler, Joshua Kelly, Isaiah Spiller are now off this roster. And you have now replaced it with J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Kamani Vidal, and Hassan Haskins. I thought it was interesting, Dan, that Hassan Haskins was also taken, I think, 7 picks after Isaiah Spiller was selected in the 4th round.
Who is now the practice squad.
But you're getting guys that are a different dynamic in terms of how they run the football, how they're utilized for what they're good at. Pass catchers, power backs, explosive guys. This combination of what Joe Hortiz has been able to put together is so impressive. And that's just the running back unit. We could talk about how he's recycled the wide receivers, the DB room, the linebacker core, whatever it is that you want to name it. Just use the running back room as a sample size. as far as what Joe Hortiz has done, and it's very impressive. And then, Dan, you mentioned it. The trade for Elijah Molden. The Chargers were in on waiver claims for cornerbacks before this trade was announced. And then you see this trade for Elijah Molden.
Oh,
and
when you texted me his name, Jake, because I was off the grid. I wasn't really paying attention to things. But all Jake's texts me is Molden.
Yes. It just immediately spoke to me again. Here is the message of Steve Clinkscale just ringing true for what he wants from his defensive backs. We know when it came down to I think a lot of us were surprised, even though Dan and I had predicted it, that they were going to end up keeping 11 DBs on the initial 53, which they did at one point in time. They did have Tony Jefferson and they did have JT Woods on this roster. And I thought, especially for the way that they were utilizing JT Woods to play both kind of the corner and the safety spot, you want to have that versatility. Well, Elijah Molden can do that. He's definitely not the same size as what JT Woods was. Plays more exclusively in the slot, but he can play inside. He can play outside. He's a versatile cornerback that you can add to this room. He brings toughness. If you've seen his highlights, you know what his game is about. I think this is the right type of minded defensive back when you're talking about rebuilding this team, talking about a guy who can come up and tackle, add that type of toughness to your DB room. Elijah Molden fits that bill in spades. So getting him for what the Chargers got, what was it? They had a 2026. I can remember if it was a 6th or a 7th round selection that they had.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that. And Dan, here we go again with, again, we talked about the running backs just now. How about just in general, the players from the teams that you are bringing people in at? The Chargers have now become essentially the Ravens/Titans West of the league, because you went out and you picked up Christian Fulton, who some people believe it was a reclamation project, just needed a change of scenery. So far, he has looked extremely good during training camp. You go out and you pick up Tart to help, really strengthen up the interior of the defensive line, which has already started to show itself in those final 2 preseason games. The trade for Elijah Molden. And then you just talk about the plethora of Ravens players that are on this, or former Ravens players that are on this team. Joe Hortiz knew what he was doing when it comes to rebuilding this roster and getting tough guys to come in here.
I'm bringing receipts. Jake, we've been doing this for a bit. And I have to give you credit. I have to thank you for leveling up my love of the NFL draft. And going back to November 19th, 2020, I'm looking at tape. I see this kid out of Washington, Elijah Molden. And I'm like, ooh. Quote, I really like Elijah Molden. Again, this was 4 years ago. I love him as an NFL slot/nickel corner. Such a smooth player to watch. Has instincts. A sure tackler. Excellent in the flats. Wouldn't mind him on this Chargers roster team one bit. Remind you, this is when they also drafted Caleb Farley. Same year. I love Elijah Molden and how versatile he is and the type of player that he is in this system specifically now, where they have these chess pieces that they kind of move around and people can play safety or outside corner, inside corner, nickel, dime, whatever. That is him. And most importantly, is this kid can tackle. His missed tackle percentage is incredibly low for a DB. And that has to give Clinkscale and Minter so much excitement. And they have to be salivating at having what I call an insurance policy in the middle of the field. Someone who can end something. Someone who can finish the play and wipe something out. I have been clamoring for cornerback help for months now.
Yeah, you got your wish.
Wish was granted, and I'm excited for that. And the question came in from Gennaro. I'm terrible at pronunciation. How do you think the secondary is going to hold up now? How many INTs? Again, Jefferson now is on the practice squad, which he seems fine with, and I think he's going to be back here pretty quick. I think he's going to come up. But generally speaking, you've now got Asante Samuel Jr., Christian Fulton, Elijah Molden, Jasir Taylor, Cam Hart. You've got Tarheeb Still,
Dean Leonard,
Dean Leonard, who's a riser, in my opinion, then all the safeties. How do you feel the secondary is going to hold up? How many interceptions? And this is the sad part, Jake. I was looking at this. Do you know the most interceptions on this team last year? Guess what the number was?
2.
2 total for the entire season last year, Jake. 9. 2 from Alohi, 2 from Asante, 1 from Derwin, K9, Michael Davis, Jazeer Taylor, and JC Jackson. Well, that brings back memories. So, how many interceptions do you think they have this year? And how do you think they're going to hold up?
I'm not going to go into the predicting interceptions because Dan's getting to the time of the year that I hate when it comes to game predictions and for me to start doing the scores and final, whatever it is. And I absolutely hate doing that. But as far as the secondary goes and in terms of how it's going to hold up, I can't say enough about how different this secondary looks. You go to training camp and you watch how just the difference in attitude, swagger, physicality. How about just being around the football, situational football, knowing where you're supposed to be as a defensive back? There is no doubt in my mind that has changed, and you have seen that reflect itself in the preseason games as well. Dan, I think you had said it. I couldn't remember if it was just related to the secondary or if it was related to this defense, but just how connected everybody looked. And as it relates to the secondary, when you're talking about the Chargers initially keeping 11 DBs on their roster, which historically you just don't do with this team, it's usually been a combination of 10, 6 corners, 4 safeties, or 5 and 5. They kept 11. And that's because you had so many guys in press. Tarheeb still has continued his track of impressive plays throughout training camp and the preseason. I think Dean Leonard had a great preseason.
He did.
Training camp and preseason games alike. Then you see what Tony Jefferson comes in and does essentially from retirement. And in the final preseason games has a stat line that any defensive back would love to have for their career. And then you go out and you get Elijah Molden. And I didn't even mention in that sentence your 2 starting cornerbacks in Asante Samuel Jr. and Christian Fulton. And that's wild. That's the wild part. So this churning of the underbelly of the roster, and on top of that, pairing it with good coaching is, I think, already yielding the results that you would like to have. So imagine what this is going to bring come regular season time.
Yeah. A lot of Chef Hortiz, which I love that nickname. I think Jim Harbaugh gave that to the general manager after what he's been doing the last few weeks. Chef Joe Hortiz. There's a question here. Let me get to it. Maybe not a question, but edge room and secondary, says Robert. Looking very deep this year. My bold prediction for the defense is they become a top 5 unit this season and shock the league. I think it means Jesse Minter is what Saley could never be, respectfully. Top 5?
It's a nice thing to shoot for, but if you really think about this in the big picture, the Chargers don't even need this defense to be a top 5.
Nope.
You don't even need them to be a top 5.
Maybe nice. I'll take it for sure.
Hell, a top 15 defense would get it done, honestly. So I appreciate the, shooting for the moon in this circumstance. And I definitely think you can see and get excited about the improvements that have, transpired thus far as it relates to a different attitude with Jesse Minter in this defense. But you don't even need him to be top 5. You really don't. I think they're just going to play much more disciplined football, better situational football. I think they're going to get a lot more pressure on the quarterbacks, given where they have beefed up this unit, especially in the middle of the field, and how this linebacking core is going to come out and produce. I think at all 3 levels, you're going to see improvement of this defense. So reason to be hyped. I would love for them to be top 5, but truthfully, I don't even think that they need to be.
I don't either. I don't either. And we're going to get into a lot more with kind of the week one matchups and all of that. But, and I don't know where this is coming from, Jake, but there are a lot of people who are low on the Chargers center, Bradley Bozeman. And I don't know where this is coming from. And maybe I missed something, but there are people saying my bold prediction is Bozeman will be benched 3 games in, or they're worried about Bozeman. Am I missing something? Like, I don't know what Bozeman has done since he's come to this team that has people that concerned, given what they've seen when he was with Greg Roman. And by the way, yes, I was incorrect. I apologize. Isaiah Spiller was on the practice squad. He was raved when Jared Patterson came in. I apologize. That's on me. I'll take the L. It's okay. But Jake, Bozeman, am I missing something?
I don't really know. I mean, look, I know from us going from the days of having the center position solidified with Corey Linsley. And you look at Bradley Bozeman coming in only on a 1-year deal, so it's probably not going to be your long-term option. Dan center was a position that I thought was deep enough last year in the draft that the Chargers would end up addressing just to back that signing up, and they didn't do that. But I think from the standpoint of, yes, you still have Brennan Hymas on this team, not necessarily saying that that's going to be an upgrade or a good emergency option. Jordan McFadden you have who can essentially play all 5 positions on the offensive line now, including even fullback or tight end or whatever the hell they want to put him at. But Bradley Bozeman, I think back in Greg Roman's system, I understand where he was last year in Carolina, but you look at anybody from Carolina last year and yeah, it's not going to look good with what that roster was producing. So I think you get some familiarity here with Greg Roman and Bradley Bozeman back. You still have a veteran presence for Justin Herbert at the center position. And maybe, Dan, it's for the fact that we haven't talked about Bradley Bozeman that much during the season.
Maybe. That's a good thing, to be honest.
Hey, anytime that you don't hear offensive linemen's names being called, it's actually a good thing. So I think what the Chargers did in going out and getting him for the under the radar signing, if you want to call it that, I thought was a good move by Joe Hortiz. By no means am I saying that he is going to come in and be able to spell Corey Linsley or produce those same type of results, but I think you're definitely going to get better results than when the Chargers didn't have Corey Linsley in there. I think the offensive line in general is going to be vastly improved. I think Zion Johnson is ready to take that next step this season. I think you're going to get better production out of Trey Pipkins for now him kicking inside to guard. Both of those moves in general are going to help how Bradley Bozeman plays. Having a capable center is in turn going to help how Zion Johnson and Trey Pipkins play at their position. And of course you have Joe Alt at right tackle, who has looked very, very good to start off his young career.
Yeah, and Forgotten Locale says Bozeman got made a captain for a reason.
There you go.
Just saying. Again, Jim Harbaugh came out with media and said the captains for the 2024 Los Angeles Chargers. No surprise, Justin Herbert, Rashawn Slater, Derwin James, Khalil Mack. And then the 2 that may be a surprise were center Bradley Bozeman and good old Denzel Perryman. What do you make of the captain's selection? Was there anybody on there that you feel not snubbed, but that you're surprised wasn't a captain?
No, I think it just, look, competitors welcome, and you just want, you know where you go for veteran leadership on this team. And even if it's for a guy for Denzel, who has been away from this team for a few years, still a 10-year veteran at the linebacker spot. You know, for everything that we want to say about how this linebacking group is going to be revamped and it's already looked better, and especially when you're thinking about Deion Henley and Junior Colson playing next to one another, having a veteran presence like Denzel Perryman is not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all.
Nope.
And as it relates to Bradley Bozeman, essentially next to Rashawn Slater, those are your 2 veterans of that group. So Yeah, it makes sense.
Let's see. Questions about Quentin Johnston. I also think Quentin Johnston will break out this season, says Caleb Collins. He needs just 1 to 3 good catches in a game from Herbert, and his confidence will skyrocket. I do think that getting good play on film in real games will help his confidence, no doubt about it. The coaching staff has been gushing over Quentin Johnston this offseason and the progress he's made. Again, they're not saying that he is a, border, he's not saying he's a superstar, but they're talking about how much he has improved. Now, time will tell, but when has the coaching staff lied to the fans?
You mean this coaching staff?
When has this current coaching staff, this current regime, said something that has been disingenuous? I'll wait. So I'm going to continue to believe them until they give me a reason to not. We'll see. Let's see. Week 1, there was a question earlier about Jake, the week 1 matchup, and was asking about, I don't know if I can find it, but running attempts, who's going to be the leading rusher, how that offense is going to look. We'll get into the full week 1 predictions and such, but if you had to guess, which again, I think that's kind of what makes this fun, is I think it was Daniel Jeremiah said on Chargers Weekly with Matt Money Smith this week of this team is the playbook, what to expect is wrapped in gift wrap. You don't know what this game is going to look like. You don't know what the offense is going to look like. You don't know who wide receiver 1 is going to be. You don't know anything. There's so many questions. But if you were to guess, how do you see the running game shaking out week 1?
J.K. Dobbins is going to be your leader as it relates to rushing attempts and rushing yards. I think that's how it's going to play out. I think the rushing attack in general, I think Greg Roman's going to want to assert his presence with authority, and everything that he and Jim Harbaugh have been talking about. Remember, in Jim Harbaugh's opening press conference, he talked about no secret that they needed to revamp this offensive line in order to protect their franchise in number 10. He's done that. After he was done talking about that, he immediately made sure that everybody knew that they're going to improve the run game. So the emphasis that Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman are going to put on running the ball and dictating the pace in this game, I think they're going to try to do that right out of the gate. And the best part about that is, Dan, and you kind of alluded to with those comments from Daniel Jeremiah, you now have a stable of running backs that all bring something different to the game. A different pace, a different skill set, different juice. Where and how you can utilize them, whether we're talking between the 20s or on the goal line. I love the type of options that they have at running back.
So the question was from Rye Guy TV, who leads the team in receiving yards week 1 and who leads them in rushing? So you said the rushing part, which is J.K. Dobbins. I think Gus Edwards might lead in rushing attempts, but I think J.K. Dobbins might lead in rushing yards. But who leads the team in receiving yards week 1?
Don't sleep on Josh Palmer.
Thank you.
Don't sleep on Josh Palmer. I know we haven't seen him during preseason games, but as much as we want to get excited about the connection between Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey, which I totally think is warranted, and I cannot wait to see that play out through the regular season, Joshua Palmer stepping in now as the veteran of this wide receiver group with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams gone, I think that he's going to turn some heads, because whenever they needed him to step up in spot duty last year, he did it. And I think that he's ready for that responsibility this year.
I said this basically as soon as the draft ended, but the week 1 match with the Raiders, personally, their secondary does not look very good. And Kevin kind of alludes to this too. I don't know. Raiders have 3 corners with experience. Watch us come out and throw it all over. I know Jack Jones had that ridiculous interception against Easton Stick, which was crazy, right? That was amazing. Again, against Easton Stick and against a largely depleted Chargers offense, and hashtag grateful for that game to get to where we are today. The secondary is not at all what I'm concerned about going up against this Raiders defense. And I think we know, but looking at the visual here, like, to me, if they can make Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins, if they can have that be more or less managed with 1, 2, 3, 4 offensive line, I don't care how many, I think they'll be just fine. And the best way to get around the destruction that Max Crosby provides quarterbacks is run it down their throat. Go the other way. Put an extra blocker. Insert Will Dissly to help with Joe Alt or Rashawn Slater or whoever. And that's why I am fascinated. And I think that's where we're going to start to see, Jake, the emphasis on protecting Justin Herbert start to pay dividends. Because I talked about insurance policy before. They have Rashawn Slater. They have the bookend tackle, right? They bring in Joe Alt, who people have talked about was the cleanest, safest, best prospect in the NFL draft. Take away position importance. You bring in Will Dissly. You add in a running game. You add in Bradley Bozeman. Trey Pipkins is massive, goes over to right guard. People have said that he's looked pretty darn good so far. All of that helps Justin Herbert, helps the run game, helps protect the crown jewel, and also helps balance football games. And you could dictate the pace. You could build that bully ball. I'm fascinated to see that actually play out because the Chargers have lost that battle for years. And this might be one of the first years we've seen in quite some time that they've won it. Jake, I was going to get to this. I know you're a fan. Blaine was watching After Dark yesterday. Anybody watch McMillan from Arizona last night?
First of all, Dan, I know you were busy yesterday. Did you watch T-Mac from Arizona last night?
I saw the final stat line and it blew my mind.
It's just ridiculous. It's absolutely just ridiculous. Just talk about a record-setting performance in week 1 that you essentially just break all of the school's records. Essentially just another one for McMillan to break.
Was it 10 receptions for 300 and something?
300 yards, 4 touchdowns. I mean, in the first half alone, Dan, you would have thought that these stats were ridiculous. And these were different balls that he was getting thrown to him that he was just able to make defenders miss. He was able to outrun defenders because he's got some juice. He's got speed. And for as elusive as he is, to see him run downfield the way he was doing it was just impressive in every facet of the game. So he just looked unstoppable last night. And I know that a lot of people kind of have the difference between T-Mac and Luther Burden out of Missouri as either wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, whichever combination you have it at. But my God, what a performance to start week 1 for T-Mac. Unbelievable.
Yep. Let's see. Let's get some of these questions. There's a bunch here. Again, if you have not done so already, hit the comments in here. Give us your questions. We'll try to go kind of rapid fire here because I got to catch up, Jake. I didn't realize how many there were here. I apologize, fam. Let's see. Dan Deach says Dissly was an underrated signing. Bell Cow says I want McMillan in the 2025 draft.
Well, if the Chargers have a productive season. Now, see, there's an interesting way to think about this because, number one, in this draft is going to be completely the opposite of the first 15 picks that you saw in the 2024 draft, where you didn't see a defender being taken until pick 15 with Latu. This coming year is going to be completely the opposite because it's going to be defensive heavy from the jump. So, but I still believe that T-Mac is going anywhere in the top 10. And if the Chargers have a productive season, they won't be picking in the top 10. So I would love to have T-Mac on this team as well, but it's likely not to happen.
Laus de Bruin, friend of the show. Who will have the first touchdown? My guess is going to be Dissly, kind of like Horvath got TD1 2 years ago against the Raiders. First touchdown. We love that he feels like Scott Matlock or something.
Wouldn't that be something? Jordan McFadden out there in motion.
I think Gus.
Yeah, I'm going to say it's a rushing touchdown. And if it's somewhere inside the 10, you'd got to predict that Gus is going to be getting the ball in that situation.
Jonathan Herrera asks, Jake, I'll let you take this one. Do y'all think Tony Jefferson will be elevated from the practice squad for a lot of games?
Yeah.
Answer.
Yet I think that this is kind of still up in the air whether or not the Chargers are going to keep 3 quarterbacks on their active roster. I think the Chargers obviously made a statement where, from the standpoint of the initial 53 cuts, that Tony Jefferson was still on this roster before some adjustments to be made, before we ultimately knew that he was going to end up signing back on the practice squad. It's just hard to ignore the veteran presence of Tony Jefferson, and especially what he did in that final preseason game. So yeah, that can't hurt your safety room at all. and now you have a safety room of Derwin James, Alohi Gilman, AJ Finley, and Tony Jefferson. Yeah, that's capable. I like that.
Yeah. Let's see. I didn't see this until just now. I'm assuming Bradley Bosa is better than Clapp? Yes. Everyone relax. I'm with you. Let's see. Question came in about Kamani Vidal. Where'd that go?
It was essentially saying, will Vidal be a running back 1 by week 10?
No.
Look, not saying that he's not capable of doing so, but I don't think that he's going to get a clear opportunity to do so, because if this running back by committee, in my opinion, is going to go throughout the season, is Vidal going to get his fair share of opportunities? Yes, I think they know exactly what he brings to the game, and it's going to be a huge asset for this running unit. But I can't expect that he's going to unseat J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards. Anything outside of an injury, I just don't see that happening.
Dingy. I think Dicker will be a top 5 or even top 3 kicker. Harbaugh's first year in San Francisco was historic for Akers, if I remember correctly. Cameron Dicker just signed a massive extension. Good for him. He has been, I think, quite literally the most accurate kicker in NFL history the first 2 years, ahead of Justin Tucker.
That's no pun intended, that's the kicker right there. When your field goal percentage accuracy and make percentage is better than Justin Tucker, that's something to take note of.
Yes. So when he says he will be a top 5, he already is, in my opinion. The guy's incredible. Let's see what else is here. Jake, what did I miss? I know I went through a whole bunch of stuff. Is there any comments here or topics?
I just had fun answering them.
This might be for me, but I'll let you answer first. Dan says, depth is still questionable in the secondary. Let's kind of peel this back for a second. So if we look at the goals of this coaching staff, they talk about versatility, and they talk about being positionless, and they talk about fundamentals and block destruction and tackling and right angles and discipline. On the outside, if we just look at who can be good outside corner depth, right now it's Christian Fulton. If you want to put Asante Samuel Jr. outside, you can. That's fine. You've got Cam Hart. You've got Dean Leonard. I don't think you would put Elijah Molden in that category. I'm saying outside only. I know people are going to move around, but whoever is going to be on the outside, do you feel the outside cornerback position, boundary corner, is deep enough?
It's better. It's improved.
Then what?
Last year. Look at what the Chargers look what the Chargers have done in just these last few months. They've acquired 4 corners. You went out and you picked up Christian Fulton in free agency. You drafted Cam Hart and Tarheeb Still. You traded for Elijah Molden. I mean, Joe Hortiz, once again, is living up to his word. He always has said you can never have enough good corners. But if we're talking about the depth in the secondary in terms of being questionable, I'm not as worried about it as maybe I would have been 4 months ago. And I also say that from the standpoint of what we've seen from this coaching staff, their imprint that they've already had on guys like Dean Leonard, who I think has looked vastly better than what he looked like in the last previous regime. So I I get it. Maybe you still have some questions at cornerback, considering that Christian Fulton's on a 1-year deal and Asante Samuel Jr. for whatever questions still want to arise from him. But in the big picture of things, I feel extremely confident with this cornerback group. Think about this just for a second.
But outside corners specifically is what I'm asking.
I get okay. Wait, well, then use this as an example, then, Dan. Last year, your outside cornerbacks were Asante Samuel Jr., Mike Davis, and J.C. Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Take away the names. You could have put anybody else's name on 2 of those jerseys, and it wouldn't have mattered. So it's not necessarily from the name standpoint. Just watch what your eyes are telling you on the screen when you're seeing these guys perform.
Fair. I feel really good about the inside cornerback, slot, nickel, dime, versatile stuff. The boundary, there's a lot riding on Christian Fulton. And again, so far throughout camp and preseason, he's looked damn good. But if there was a spot in the cornerback room that I think could use more depth, I guess, it probably would be the outside corner. But inside, Tarheeb still, Jazir Taylor. I put Asante Samuel Jr. I'd rather have him in there. I know the tackling is something, but he's improved that. And Elijah Molden. That's a great slot corner, nickel corner group, in my opinion. Question came in from Daryl. Guys, the yellow pants, are they gone now? Please confirm if possible. Chargers came out with their schedule of jerseys. And I don't know if folks noticed this, but all of the pictures they have all kind of come together. If you look at it on my screen now. All of these pictures, Jake, not a single yellow pants, it looks like. Are yellow pants gone?
I can neither confirm nor deny if this is true or not.
I don't know. I actually didn't really notice it until when he asked this. Maybe. I don't know. But what did you know? What did you take from the Navy jerseys week 12 versus the Ravens? And also no Royals on the schedule.
Which I know kind of irked people a little bit in terms of not seeing those jerseys, because it's a nice combination whenever they roll out the Royals. But hey, look, remember when we always talked about that the Chargers should play every single week in powder blues because they had such a good record historically when they played in those jerseys? They were like almost undefeated back in the day. But like, I understand it. It's nice from an aesthetically pleasing purpose, but if it means that they're winning all their games in the white jerseys, then who cares?
Yeah. They say no Navy. There is a Navy jersey. Again, Navy jerseys are week 12. This, and maybe this is just wishful thinking, but this Chargers team just seems like they are so good at coming out with things and clever, subtle hints and all that kind of stuff, and waiting till the last perfect moment to announce things. Again, I go back to the Bud Dupree interview. I think it was with Chris Long, if I remember right. And it seemed like this was like 2 months ago. It seemed like he slipped and kind of said something about what the Chargers are doing with the Navy jerseys. And he was specifically talking about retro. I still think there might be something up their sleeves.
Could be surprised.
If not now, next year, but I'm still holding out hope. Forgotten Lookout says, the yellow pants are nice. They provide a nice pop. You guys are just mean. Joseph says, yellow pants are great. Let's see. Chris says, all I want as my birthday wish today is to beat the Raiders week 1. Happy birthday, by the way. Chris, happy birthday, everybody. Happy birthday in the comments. Here's the question, Jake. Week 1. Storylines. What? I'll ask people in the comment, put it in the chat, folks. I'll give me your answer because I'm curious. I'll put these up here. But what do you feel is the biggest determining factor in who wins this game?
Trenches. Outside of Justin Herbert, which we all know is going to be a huge storyline in this new offensive system under Harbaugh, trenches. Are the Chargers going to win the war in the trenches on both sides of the ball? because that's where they failed to get it done under the Brandon Staley regime. So is this offensive line going to be improved? By all accounts from what we've seen, it definitely should be. Is the interior of the defensive line, is this pass rush going to be able to get after quarterbacks and hold their own? I think they've done a good job in terms of bringing in the personnel to strengthen it. I think we've heard Jim Harbaugh talk about Scott Matlock so much. You still have the versatile Morgan Fox in the interior of that defensive line. Now you combine that with Poona Ford and Tart in the middle. I think we're going to be very surprised with this interior of the defensive line. And I'm looking forward to it. But Dan, that's where it starts and that's where it ends. And I think that that's where Jim Harbaugh is thinking it as well. Let's win the trench battle and we can control the pace of this game.
Yeah, Dan says they're going to have their hands full with Crosby and Wilkins.
Yes, they will. They will.
I think that's the key. If they can keep the pocket a pocket, I think they're going to be just fine. But in terms of storylines, we've all talked about it, and like there were a lot of. This is kind of an and response. Like there were a lot of reasons why the Chargers season plummeted last year, and a lot of it was once Justin went down, the whole thing was gone. But again, like you go back to like the big picture. This team lost football games because the secondary was hot garbage and undisciplined, and they could not run the football, and they could not block. Like those were the three issues that plagued this team throughout. Undisciplined defense in the back end. They could not run the ball, and they could not protect Justin Herbert or really block, run, or pass, especially on the outside, tackles, tight ends, etc., not named Rashawn Slater. If the defensive secondary is more disciplined, think about how many games this team lost last year solely because of that. I was at Lambeau Field when everybody wants to talk about Quentin Johnston's drop, which was big and it was awful, and they could have won the game in spite of everything. But we quickly forget Mike Davis getting torched in the middle of the field, tackle missed, guy runs on the sidelines. Asante Samuel Jr., blatant missed tackle, bad angle. Mike Davis torched for a touchdown in all of this on the same drive. And it happened over and over and over. Remember the Tennessee game, Jake? How that wide receiver group got behind Mike Davis, of all people, is beyond me. And how often we saw this team try to get a 3rd and 1 via the ground. 2nd and 10 becomes 3rd and 11. 1st and 10, 2nd and 9. Fix those, you're good. And then probably the other part was specifically pass protection at end of football games. That was like nails on a chalkboard. How often we saw towards the end of the game, opposing defenses knew that the Chargers could not block when there was pressure. And how many times this Chargers offensive line / running backs, tight ends crumbled and got Justin Herbert crushed. That's what I'm looking for. Eye test. Can those things be fixed or improved? If those 3 things can be fixed, again, I said 10 wins. I said 10 wins from the beginning because I believe that this team will fix that. And go look at what this defense looked like in preseason. Again, I know it's preseason. I get it. You never saw the Chargers defense look like that in preseason before. And that's without Derwin James. That's without Alohi Gilman, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Thule, Bud Dupree. There's reason to be excited. I know this was me on a pedestal here for a second. I apologize. But week 1's going to be big because you're going up against a bona fide wide receiver who is arguably the best in the NFL. You're going up against arguably the best edge rusher in the entire NFL. And you're going up against arguably the best interior defensive lineman currently, or at least top 3 in the NFL. If you can beat that, great signs for years to come, for games to come. Luckily for the Chargers, they don't have a quarterback other than Gardner Minshew. So, any other storylines for you, Jake? Big ones.
Tom Telesco versus Joe Hortiz. Kind of the underbelly of everything, to see how interesting two paths shifted the day after the final game between the Raiders and the Chargers last year in that 60 score game from the Raiders. Chargering is now becoming a trend thing on Twitter because they're talking about it on Thursday Night Football. Al Michaels is wondering, what the hell am I still doing watching this blowout? And two paths are changed after that because the Chargers move on from Brandon Staley, Tom Telesco. A month later, get Jim Harbaugh as their head coach. Tom Telesco joins the black and silver. That'll be an underbelly storyline for sure.
A few minutes left here, Jake. Ronald, and I think this is an important question because we don't want to just blow smoke. We don't want to just talk sunshine and rainbows. We talk about the things that we believe that they have fixed. But what maybe concerns or what possible problems could we see with this Chargers team that maybe could drive Chargers fans insane?
Maybe just some of that. I mean, it's funny. I'm literally like grasping at straws here because I'm trying to possibly answer this question. I don't want to just come on here and say, they're not going to hit any roadblocks. They're going to be a well-oiled machine, but I know that that's not reality. And my initial thought was going to be everything that everybody was talking about while Justin Herbert was in the boot and his time with his wide receivers. Is that going to be affected? And then when he came back after being out of the boot, just went full God mode in practice and had one of the best practices that he's ever had as a quarterback and seemingly just didn't miss a beat. I think in terms of, I don't want to necessarily say problems, but I'm just going to be interested to see with a revamped wide receiver core like this, I think outside of Joshua Palmer, because he obviously has the most time, most rapport with him thus far, how is he going to connect with his new wide receivers? DJ Chark, Ladd McConkey. You run the underbelly of this because the Chargers now have 7 wide receivers on this roster. I'd like to believe that if Justin Herbert is throwing Brendan Rice the ball, that something good is going to come of that this time rather than what we saw in the preseason. That's where I would start. Again, you look at it defensively. Dan kind of just laid it out. I think at every single level of the defense, the Chargers have done their job from a roster construction standpoint to build that depth better. And I think from a coaching standpoint, that defense is going to be vastly improved. Most
pleasantly surprising, Jake, about the defense, we haven't even talked about this today, but how night and day the linebacking group looks.
Yes. That's the other thing. When you have guys like Troy Dye and Nick Neiman putting together performances the way that they did in week 1 of the preseason, when we're not even talking about Deion Henley and Junior Colson, that room has been recycled and reinvigorated and however you want to call it, upgraded just in a single offseason. And again, I think it's based off of personnel. I think it's the connection between them and Navarro Bowman. I think Navarro Bowman has had a tremendous impact on that unit alone.
Shout out.
So again, the one thing that Dan and I spoke of way too many times in a negative fashion when it came to the Achilles heel of this team was not so much the talent that was on this roster. It was the coaching. It was the preparation. It was the ability to have in-game adaptation to what was taking place. When the Chargers got hit in the mouth last year, they didn't know how to react to it. I think you're going to have much better results when situations come up like that with Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, there's a couple of people here that were giving answers for kind of what could possibly go wrong. I think there people are kind of concerned, I guess, a bit about the interior offensive line, which again, like fair, we haven't seen dominant interior offensive line play, and they're not Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt levels. So I get that. If Lau Zabrun says interior offensive line doesn't improve and they have a horrible run defense is a big one. I do think that run defense is going to be better. Just looking at how much emphasis they have put in short yardage situations and run defense in training camp. We've been there on the other side of the fence. I think that's going to be improved. Kevin says third down could be tough, especially if we're in third and long. And then Bravo says, I think one of the new problems we will face is play calling. People are going to question it. It's going to be different. We're going to run when we think they should pass. And that is something that I am kind of bracing for, and not necessarily in a bad way, but I had a fantasy draft weekend a couple weeks ago, and friends of mine who are big Niners fans and understand Greg Roman very, very well. And they say, you'll love Greg Roman in year one. They say, but year 3 is where things get tough, where you'll see a 3rd and 9 and they're running the ball. I say, oh, well, Greg Roman, he's talked about how he's took a year off to kind of transform and kind of give himself new energy and figure out how he can improve offensive. And they have this big staff. That is something that I am curious about, is how balanced this offense will be. And again, like to Sean Merriman's point when he had him on the show earlier, Jake, I don't think that this Chargers coaching staff is that stupid to take the ball out of Justin Herbert's hands when it matters most, in situations that would benefit him being the quarterback with the ball in his hands. But I do think that there will be time where we'll see this Chargers team kind of led by the mantra of Jim Harbaugh, where we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. We don't want to do anything stupid. We'll punt the ball. We trust our defense. We'll go at it again. Live to fight another day. That might be tough when we're used to the gunslinging Justin Herbert and we're all just hoping he puts a cape on. So it's a transition. It's a difference, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad one. But I'm kind of already bracing for it. Is that fair?
It's fair because, look, the Chargers are not going to come out completely flawless in week 1, maybe even by week 3. And I'm not saying that that's going to result in losses because of it. But at the same standpoint, there are still some things that are going to be ramped up in certain units as opposed to still things that need to get going on others. But this is where I have confidence in it, Dan. I go back to the coaching standpoint. Remember, when Brandon Staley was brought to this team to be the head coach, a bunch of people expected this mass exodus of players and assistant coaches that were going to come to follow him to build out the rest of the staff.
His guys.
That never transpired. You had Joe Lombardi for 2 years as your offensive coordinator. When they brought in Kellen Moore, Dan and I included thought that was going to be a much better improvement than what we had saw under the Lombardi scheme. That didn't end up happening either. Now you have Jim Harbaugh, who has essentially taken a number of his coaches from Michigan.
No one says no to Jim Harbaugh.
Greg Roman, who has a well-documented history with Jim Harbaugh back in the time during the 49ers days. Even still, look what Greg Roman was doing under his brother John in Baltimore. There is so much interconnectivity with this coaching staff that I think is going to bridge some of the gap and the doubts that people have. Why? Because this Chargers fan base has not been used to something like that historically. They haven't seen this type of coaching for the better part of almost 2 decades now. And that's what they've been missing for such a long time. When it came to those critical situations, fourth quarter, situational football, what adjustments do you make at halftime on either side of the ball? That's where that X factor, I think, to me, is going to come back as a huge plus for this team. I think they're going to have the talent and the players on this team playing at a much better level than what you may have gotten from a dozen free agents that the Chargers signed last year that didn't end up performing. I think you're going to get the underbelly and the depth of this roster playing better because of the coaches that you have on this unit.
I'm excited, and we're going to get into week 1 matchups. Again, every week we will go into kind of pregame, postgame, keys to the game, key matchups, bold predictions, final score predictions, kind of the key storylines throughout. We'll get to that. That's coming. And I cannot believe we are already at week 1, Jake, which is so exciting. So we'll go into more depth on all things Chargers versus Raiders week 1. Jake, I love doing the live shows because we get to have like a wide gamut of things to talk about. And it's really led by the listeners and the viewers. So I appreciate all of you who took part and helped kind of drive this conversation because y'all are the best. Jake, anything else? We'll have the giveaway announcement here probably tomorrow. What do you think? Should we do it tomorrow?
Hell, drop it whenever you want. But sure. Let's celebrate Labor Day with a Chargers giveaway. That works.
Perfect. Okay. Anything else you want to discuss on this fine Sunday morning before you go get sloshed?
Appreciate it. Thanks for talking about that. Even though it's probably a guarantee. I have to make sure that I do it obviously after the fantasy draft, so I know at least what I'm doing. But it's going to be a fun Sunday. Side note for anybody who follows me and knows my love for movies in general, the wife and I start our 90-day horror movie marathon tonight. So it runs from September 1st to the end of November. So anybody, obviously I will stay and talk chalk with anybody who wants to talk football any day of the week. I love talking football. But anytime you want to talk movies in general, I'm down to talk with you.
You are a gentleman and a scholar. You are.
I am anything but.
Okay. With that, if you have not done so already, please do us a favor. Take 10 seconds. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Go into Apple or Spotify or whatever it is and leave us a review, comment, give us feedback. We're always looking for ways to improve and to help make the show what you guys would like it to be. Jake, you're already starting to see comments. New Alien movie was top notch.
Yes, it was.
Tomato meter. What are you giving it?
I'd give it an 85.
Ooh.
That's where I would put it.
That's high. That's high for you. Okay. Wow. All right, Jake. You can find Mr. Hefner at Jake T. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. Enjoy the weekend. 1 week from today, the Chargers play the Raiders at SoFi, and I cannot wait. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Chargers Unleashed, and we will talk to you soon on the next Chargers Unleashed. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.